Delighted to be joined here by Senator Kay Hagan of North Carolina, former senator now. Happy to talk to us about development and its place in what are sometimes called the 3Ds: defense, diplomacy, and development. She traveled all over the world as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee and saw firsthand a lot of the challenges and a lot of the opportunities that are posed by development, by foreign aid. So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges, though, to increasing or even sustaining foreign aid. We're in an election year. Voters say they care mostly about national security and the economy. How do you talk to them about development and foreign aid?
Well, first, national security is such a huge issue, as well as the economy. And I think what we're seeing right now is, and we have seen it for a number of years, that people are saying, oh, don't spend the money abroad, spend it here. So if we can say, let's just spend up to 1% of the national budget. I think if you ask random people what that amount is, they all say 10%, 20%, you name it. But if you say just do 1%, everybody says, oh, that's a good idea. That's okay. And if we can maintain this 1%, I think we are being effective, and I think we can make just a huge difference all around the world in diplomacy and development, which I think are two of the key components, as well as looking at how that affects the defense. I think we can make a huge difference in the world, and I think that's what we are really, really good at in the U.S.
I feel like I missed an opportunity. I should have had people raise their hands if they thought the aid development budget was 25%, 20%, 15%, 10%, under 5%. Because it's true, Americans famously overestimate this.
All the time.
So how do you change that? Because that's obviously a big part of generating the political will for development. If people think, oh, we're already spending 25% of our budget on this stuff.
Well, I think what you've got to do is say, let's do that 1%, and then explain some of the good things that are really happening in the world. Because if we can affect, especially from a national security standpoint, relations like that, that really means much less that we end up having to spend when we look at it from a defense standpoint. And one of the things that I think we've got to do better in our country is explain from a marketing perspective almost to the people in these foreign countries that it is U.S. money that is helping these transformations take place. I spent time in Tanzania, in Ghana, in South Africa. I looked at where the PEPFAR money is going. I looked at mothers-to-mothers programs that are taking place in Khayelitsha in South Africa, near Cape Town, looking at how women who have had HIV and are having children, how they can be sure to not pass on HIV positive to their children. And it is a very, very, very effective program. And so much of this is all done through PEPFAR. And I was in Tanzania and looking at how, from an agricultural standpoint, that we are really helping the people there become independent on food. And if you look at the continent of Africa, it should be doing so much more in the process of feeding the continent of Africa, even to the point of exporting. But you look at the lack of infrastructure, very, very poor basic infrastructure. You look at how expensive fertilizer is. You look at the unreliable markets that they need to get their product to the market. And I compare that to when I was growing up. I used to go visit my grandparents on a farm that my dad grew up on, a very, very small, poor tobacco farm in South Carolina. And when he was growing up, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have indoor plumbing, and they were farmers. And he tells the story of why he is a lifelong Democrat, because the WPA came in and built their first outhouse, taught a two-seater, by the way, taught his mother how to cook using a pressure cooker, paid his father to go out there and help build roads. We know how to do this. What we need to do is be sure, and people knew it was the WPA making those changes. I think we've got to do a better job of telling not only Americans, but foreigners too, what it is that this money is being used for, and then we'll get a better buy-in nationally and internationally.
I've been a reporter for 20 years, and I finally get the opportunity to connect national security directly to a two-seater outhouse, and I'm going to jump on it. Because we were talking backstage, the United States is not the only game in town. There is a real, very real national security component to this, to the idea of development, to the idea of going to countries in Africa and building bridges. You and I have both ridden on the George W. Bush Highway in Ghana. We're not the only game in town. China is doing an enormous amount of work, of development work. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like on the ground, how American aid and Chinese differ.
A lot. I mean, it's night and day. When I was in Ghana on the George Bush Highway, you could also see the Chinese. And when the Chinese build stuff, they don't employ local workers. They bring all the Chinese in to do the job at hand. And if you think about what they're doing, China has how many people?
Several billion.
A lot.
Yeah.
They cannot supply their own people with food and natural resources. So I think we all know that they are going out and buying that up. So when they come into countries in Africa, in Ghana, they are buying up the natural resources of that country. But in order to get to them, what are they doing? They're building highways. They're not building a George Bush highway to help the local people. They are doing it so that they can get access to their product, access to bring it in so they can then ship it back out to China. And doing it, once again, with no local labor. That's what you're seeing. And the thing is, I think the people where they're doing this, once again, have not connected the dots. But the difference is the way we do it. And one of the things that concerns me was when I was in Ghana, we were in Accra, and we were having a meeting with the local Chamber of Commerce, the Americans who were there and other who were the sort of the top business individuals in these communities. And when we started talking about the development efforts, the USAID money, what was going on, I'll never forget one individual who probably employed more people in Ghana, in that community, had no idea that the U.S., using our USAID money, was doing these great things right there in Ghana. And it sort of opened my eyes, realizing we've got to do a better messaging of what it is that we're doing with this money, not only locally, not only in the U.S., but in other countries too where this is taking place. And I think that's, you don't see that unless you're on the ground hearing it. And that's what I'd like to convey is one of the areas that we've got to really look at is using just a little tiny bit of money to be sure that we are getting the bang for the buck. Because what we're doing is totally different from what China's doing.
Is that gap in messaging, is that just because we don't bother to really hammer home the point that we're doing these projects? Is it that China's just better at getting the word out there? Where do you see what are the fixable parts of this?
Well, I think we do things on a budget that we're trying to get the most for it, and we're not willing to spend one little penny on getting that word out. And I think in order, for people to realize that 1% really is making a difference in the world, we've got to tell people that. We can't just use it by saying, don't complain about it. We've got to tell them what it is that we're doing.
So Americans are a generous people. Even though we struggle with this notion of foreign development, foreign aid, government help, Americans give more via private charities than basically any other country in the world. There's been, it seems to me, in addition to the big, large-scale things like PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, there have been a lot of smaller charities that are getting a lot more attention, a lot more look. If you're an American who's frustrated with the amount of aid going to places like Africa, how much should you consider turning, instead of, maybe they're complementary, you put political pressure for more foreign aid, but turning their cash towards these smaller, smarter, more targeted charities?
Well, let me give you a story about when I was in Tanzania. And I was on a visit with 4 other Republican senators. I was the Democrat. And one of the things we looked at was the malaria nets. And we went into a small tribal village, and we had the head of the village there, and the locals put on a play. Where the idea meaning they wanted to be sure that families were being able to make use of the malaria nets, not just the father. And so they did a play where they had some sort of a makeshift area where they went to sleep. So you had a father and a son and a wife. Only the father got under the malaria net. And then you had right next to it another family where they all got under malaria nets. And as the play progressed, the family where the little boy did not get under the net ended up getting very sick and died. And the other family is fine. So obviously, they're getting out to the local villagers there the fact that everybody needs to be under a net. And under one net, a lot of these people are all under one net. Some of them maybe more. But I thought it was a great example, very visual, with music, a little bit of dancing, what was going on. So then we were tasked with taking these nets, $10 a net, to make a difference, save a child's life, help the family. And then we went into the huts of these villagers and taught them with one hammer, 2 nails, where to put the net. And when they're not sleeping, the net is not out. It's hung up on the one nail. But then the other nail on the other side that's used to drape this malaria net over the matting where they'll end up putting the mat down to sleep at night. You know, something that is pretty easy to do. It's not Habitat for Humanity. It is, 2 nails and a hammer. This can be done if people will help with the cost of a very negligible cost of putting a net up. And it makes, just think, one child dying in a village, what that would affect for that entire village. So it's huge. But yet this is something that many small groups could participate in, as well as others.
Do you remember how to put up a...
I could do it. I can definitely do that, and would love to do some more of it.
We've talked now before about PEPFAR multiple times, President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, one of George W. Bush's finest accomplishments, enjoys a lot of bipartisan support, popular in the region. Is there any reason to think that a program like that might be in danger as America looks more inward and as we hear more and more about, let's spend our money here?
Oh, I definitely think it could be. And that's one of the real troubling things. Think about Ebola 2 years ago. Think about the Ebola crisis and what was happening and how scared people were in our country. Well, in North Carolina, we had 154 people die of the flu. Nobody in North Carolina got Ebola. As I recall, only one person in the U.S. died of Ebola, and he had been overseas. And yet, it was this scare of the nation. And I think it was sort of propelled to make, media made it a scare. But what we realize is the research that we do at Fort Detrick through the Department of Defense, the research that we do has an unbelievable aspect of controlling and hopefully being able to find cures, vaccines for Ebola. That's the kind of stuff that I see the U.S. heavy in research, helping us finance things like that through this. And think of the devastation that would take place in our country if a virus like that ran rampant. I think we would very quickly say, spend the money and help figure this out. I think those are some of the things we've got to be thinking about. And you look at the Zika virus right now, that needs to be a stand-alone bill that funds the Zika issue and see what we can bring to bear on that issue, not only for our country, but for particularly women around the world.
Picking up something you put down, we in the news media are uniters, not dividers. Everybody hates us. No. You're not wrong. You're not wrong about the Ebola coverage, except that to my mind, it went from ignoring it to hyping it beyond belief. We have to find a better way to find a middle course here. As long as it was Liberia and other countries, we were like, eh.
We hyped it beyond belief, but it went to bed after the November election of 2014.
But it's a really good. For one thing, it's one of the clearest connections between national security and if you're my timekeeper, I can't see you because the light's really bright. Okay, thank you. That was one of the best overlaps of national security, development, medical assistance, international cooperation, everything like that. What is the media's role in this debate, in this whole debate? Not just Ebola, but about development. What should we be doing better? What should we be doing more of, less of? I realize I'm inviting all kinds of media criticism, and I welcome it. But in all seriousness, what do you see, having taken a step back from the political arena, what do you see as the main problems, or for that matter, the things that we do well?
Well, one of the things when I'm talking about a marking, if we could get media to actually go in and watch a net being put up. People are good. People want to hear stories. They want to visualize things. And if you can visualize it, you can understand it. You ought to go into an area in Kailisha and hear this Mothers to Mothers program and see the difference it's making when you have women who have grown up. Kailisha is a slum right out of Cape Town with 1 million people living in metal huts. And yet these women, they're educated. I told somebody these women could be an anchor on a TV news show with the unbelievable grasp of the English language. And what they were doing to prepare other women, I'm thinking that's what people want to see. They want to see the work that's being done and where their money's going. And I think media could have a huge part of sharing that with the American public.
All right. Kay Hagan, former Democratic Senator of North Carolina, thank you very much.
Thank you.